Hello, I'm Rob Satloff. I'm the Siegel Executive Director, and welcome to the Washington Institute. There's been a lot of policy focus and a lot of media focus on different aspects of the Middle East lately. A lot of focus on Gaza and food distribution, a lot of focus on the Iran nuclear negotiations, a lot of focus on what's going on inside Syria and the dramatic change of US policy there. What there hasn't been a lot of focus on is that it is now 6 months since the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, and 6 months of discussion about the disarming of Hezbollah, which is the prime Lebanese government responsibility in this ceasefire, and the potential for turning this dramatic change in Lebanon into perhaps a political process between Israel and Lebanon. Very little focus on this. The president of Lebanon, for example, did not go and visit with President Trump during our president's trip around the Middle East recently. What is going on 6 months after the ceasefire? What is the status of the effort to disarm Hezbollah? Is politics inside Lebanon reflecting the changed military circumstances left from the Israel-Hezbollah conflict? What is the situation in Palestinian camps, where the government is also committed to disarming radical groups that have the means to send missiles and rockets against Israelis? And what is the policy of the United States toward all these issues? Indeed, in just the last several days, last several hours, we saw a fascinating image of the arrival in Beirut of the Iranian foreign minister, making a play for renewed influence, even after the battlefield defeat of Iran's major proxy, Hezbollah, 6 months after that. And this occurs at the same moment when there seems to be uncertainty about who in Washington has the Lebanon file, with news reports of the impending departure of Morgan Ortagus, the deputy envoy to the Middle East, who has given a strong voice in support of the need for the Lebanese government to assertively disarm Hezbollah. But if she is moving from her position, who will have that responsibility? And will Washington continue to press the Lebanon government to proceed with its requirements under the ceasefire? Lots to talk about under in an issue that hasn't gotten a lot of attention in recent times. I'm delighted to be joined today by three Washington Institute experts who understand in great detail different aspects of the Lebanon story. We're going to begin with Haneen Ghadar. Haneen is the Friedman Senior Fellow here at the Institute. She's an expert in Shiite politics in Lebanon and throughout the Levant. She's the former managing editor of Now Lebanon, the main English language news platform in Beirut. And she's the author of Hezbollah Land, Mapping Dahiya and Lebanon's Shia Community. After Haneen speaks, we'll turn to Asaf Orion. Asaf is the Liz and Moni Reuven International Fellow here at the Institute and a retired brigadier general, formerly serving in the Israel Defense Forces, served as the head of the Strategic Affairs Division in the IDF Planning Directorate, whose responsibilities included coordinating and communicating with the Lebanese Armed Forces and with UNIFIL, the United Nations interim force in Lebanon that sits, if not fulfills responsibility, that at least sits between Israel and Lebanon. Delighted to have him with us today. And also on our panel today is Ghaith El-Omari. Ghaith is the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Senior Fellow here at the Institute, an expert in Palestinian politics, the Arab-Israeli peace process, a former Palestinian negotiator who has deep insight into what's going on in the Palestinian camps inside Lebanon, and the battle for power within these camps, which in many ways mirrors the larger contest for power in the broader Palestinian world that most people focus on in between the West Bank and Gaza. And delighted to have Ghaith with us today. So we're going to open with Haneen. Haneen, I'll turn the floor over to you. Audio, please. Oh, one more point before Haneen starts. If you want to get into our conversation later in the program, please feel free to use one of two ways. If you're on Zoom, please use the Q&A function of your Zoom bar. Otherwise, please email me directly at rsatloff, R-S-A-T-L-O-F-F, at washingtoninstitute.org. And I will be monitoring my email, and we'll bring your questions into the conversation. Okay, I turn the floor over now to Haneen.
Thank you. Again, thank you for being here. So many questions and so little time to unpack, but let me start by saying that, as always, Lebanon is the land of missed opportunities. And this, again, seems to be another opportunity that might be missed because of the recent changes that Rob talked about earlier. Let me just say that the opportunity is still there, but there is a serious slowness, unseriousness of the implementation of the ceasefire from the Lebanese side. We hear a lot of talk about the state sovereignty over the arms. We hear a lot of talk about plans and strategies, even dialogue about, like how to impose state sovereignty over arms in Lebanon. But on the ground, the process is extremely slow. There is a lot of work, good work, that is being done south of Litani, but not really much is being done north of Litani. North of Litani, the Lebanese Armed Forces have actually confiscated some of Hezbollah's weapons, but in comparison to knowing that it's been 6 months, it's really, really very little. Some reports talk about 8, some reports talk about 12 arms depots, which is really nothing. Israel has done more by continuing its attacks on Hezbollah's infrastructure in Lebanon than the Lebanese army has done north of Litani. South of Litani, it's something that the army is taking very, very seriously, because at the end of the day, in 2016, the army did also take south of Litani seriously, and we know exactly what happened afterwards. The problem is today, Lebanon needs to understand that 2006 is not 2025, at basic 2024, and basically Israel, with the ceasefire agreement, gave itself the right to continue targeting Hezbollah's military infrastructure. And recent escalation in Lebanon, especially in the south of Lebanon, north of Litani, and the continued daily assassinations of Hezbollah's commanders and military figures, is today very, very apparent that Israel is not stopping if Lebanon's decision is not to confront Hezbollah. It's very simple. If Lebanon wants to disarm Hezbollah, there is no avoidance of confrontation. Confrontation is a must, because Hezbollah is not going to surrender its weapons. Hezbollah will never. As we speak today, Syria has seized a shipment of precision missiles heading from Iran to Lebanon. They are still getting their missiles. They are still getting their weapons. And Lebanon is in negotiation, in dialogue with Hezbollah. This says one thing, that Hezbollah is trying to play the game of time. Hezbollah is trying to buy the time and drag as much as they can until something comes up in Iran or in the region. And Hezbollah, according to reports, Lebanese media reports, and according to some sources close to these, like Hezbollah-Lebanon negotiations, some news are coming out that Hezbollah does not want to surrender any of its weapons before elections, the parliamentary elections in May 2026. These reports started coming out when Lebanon has, after the Israeli escalation, because Hezbollah understands very well that in 1 year, the parliamentary elections are coming. Hezbollah has lost its military infrastructure. Hezbollah has lost its allies. Hezbollah has lost its financial infrastructure. Hezbollah only has its political representation, and the political representation Hezbollah has in the elections. If they maintain this political representation in the next elections, it means that they can still have influence. If they lose the political representation in the next parliamentary elections, it means that they will lose this influence, because the parliament will bring the government, the next government, and the next appointments, the next everything. The next elections, the next parliamentary elections, is probably most probably the most important, crucial elections in the history of Lebanon. These elections are going to really make or break Hezbollah or make or break Lebanon. And the Hezbollah understands that very, very well. The last month's municipal elections that happened all over Lebanon over a month, over four weekends, was an exercise for everyone to understand what really happened. And I would say for Hezbollah, it was a good result in terms that they maintained the municipalities over Lebanon. However, they know that they're not very comfortable, because if you look at the numbers, can we share this? Can we share the screen, please? This is in Arabic. I'm going to translate the names. These are the numbers compared of the last 2016 municipal elections and the recent ones. Saida is a Sunni city. Saida is the one at the bottom here. It's a Sunni city, and it was a very contested battle. Jazin is more Christian, but look at the Shia. Look at the Shia towns. It's very interesting that the that the people who actually came and voted are very much less. And if you look at also the numbers, the turnaround, the low turnaround is an indication. But also, if you look at the numbers of who actually won in the elections. Yes, the battle was in Baalbek, Hermel, Sur, Nabatiye, but they won. Hezbollah and Amal ran together and won by very small margins, sometimes with a difference of 1 or 2 or 5 or 7 votes. This is not a comfort zone for Hezbollah, and this is after threats, the use of arms, threatening people to withdraw, threatening people to vote for them, many incidents of attacks, many incidents of buying votes. They did a lot in order to get something that actually not really that good. So they're not in the comfort zone, and they understand that once they surrender their arms, once they lose their arms, this comfort vote is gonna this vote is gonna flip against them. Okay, we can get rid of the screenshot. Let me just say 2 more things and then we move on, because I know I'm exceeded my time. Another indication of the municipal elections is that the Christians today have one big leadership, which is the Lebanese forces. The Lebanese forces, under the leadership of Samir Jaja, obviously, it was a wave. It lost in some little places, but there was a Lebanese forces wave across the Christian street, which means that Hezbollah has lost its Christian ally, Jubran Basil, the Aunists, basically. It's very telling about the next elections, which will eventually change the how the next parliament is going to look like without Hezbollah's Christian allies. However, the main concerning one is the Sunni votes. The Sunni votes in Lebanon, if you look at the general voting, I can go into the details, but I'm not going to. It is obvious that those who were supported by Saudi Arabia did not really get enough, but those who were supported by Qatar won. The Lebanese Sunnis voted for the Qataris, for the Lebanese Sunnis who now are covered politically or that connection with the Qatar with Qatar are getting more. Qatar is replacing Saudi Arabia and Lebanon. This is again another concerning issue. So I'm not going to go into the details. I can address this in the Q&A. But what am I saying this? I'm saying this is that the next parliament, we might see less Christian Hezbollah allies, but we might see more Sunni Hezbollah allies. And Hezbollah understands this very much, and they're working on it. For the ceasefire agreement and disarmament, they will not surrender their weapons. And if Lebanon does not really want to confront Hezbollah, as we see today with the Iranian trying to come back, obviously this week with Iraq's visit and the shipment that was seized in Syria, it shows that the Iranians are trying to come back. But also this means that if we come to the next parliamentary elections, which is extremely crucial, and Hezbollah still has their arms, Hezbollah might be able to maintain most, if not all, of its representation in the parliament, Shia representations, which means they're not going to go away, and they can say we still represent a major part of the country. Meanwhile, Israel is still going after Hezbollah, but it's not enough to go after the military infrastructure of Hezbollah, while the political infrastructure of Hezbollah is very active today in the other field, which is elections and politics, etc. That's where the American policy comes in. While Israel is taking care of the military part, the U.S. should come in and target the political part with all tools possible, including sanctions, sanctioning Hezbollah's allies who are working on, like here I'm talking about Hezbollah's main allies in Lebanon, Shia or non-Shia, who are actually giving Hezbollah the lifeline that they need today.
Okay, thank you very much. Very, very helpful. All right, we're now going to turn to former Brigadier General Asaf Orion. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to email them to me directly at rsatloff@washingtoninstitute.org or use the Q&A function of your Zoom bar. Asaf, the floor is yours.
Well, since 2006, the security architecture governing southern Lebanon was a combination of the Lebanese Armed Forces and UNIFIL, as you mentioned before. And that combination utterly failed to stop Hezbollah from building in the south and eventually attacking Israel, which led to this campaign in which Hezbollah was defeated. After the ceasefire, we have a new architecture, still with the Lebanese Armed Forces, still with the participation of UNIFIL, but much more important is a new implementation mechanism led by the United States, participated by France. And this combination managed to invigorate the Lebanese Armed Forces into action once that Hezbollah was severely defeated and degraded. However, the backstop to this architecture is, as Hanin mentioned, an Israeli enforcement effort, which you can see every day. You can see in southern Lebanon, you can see in the Bekaa area, and even in Beirut occasionally. And this tells us both that Israel remained focused on the intelligence side of understanding what's going on the ground, and the operational side of, after perhaps sharing some of this intelligence with its new partners through the US side to the Lebanese Armed Forces, it eventually enforces itself if things are not addressed as it expects. So basically, we see day in, day out attacks on Hezbollah military members who are trying to reestablish the military infrastructure in the south and elsewhere, in a sense that Israel shows that this is a new day. We are not going to sit idly watching Hezbollah take the time and rebuild. And so it's a new reality. When you say which kind of a ceasefire it is, well, Hezbollah mostly ceased its attacks, and Israel is mostly continuing its fire on whatever violation Hezbollah is implementing or committing, even though there's an official ceasefire. I think the Lebanese leadership right now is quite comfortable with that arrangement. I would say, lamenting publicly, but probably are benefiting from this direct enforcement as an ultimate backstop to whatever they are doing. And we need to also understand that these ongoing attacks indicate that Hezbollah is trying to rebuild. We are hearing day in, day out about weapon transfers foiled or thwarted by the Syrians over the border, and occasional attacks by Israel over the border. And so it's an ongoing effort to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't resurge. Another development I would say is that Israel seems to have, let's say, written off UNIFIL as part of a larger disconnect with the UN establishment, which seemed to be specifically anti-Israel and on occasion anti-Semitic. And I think that Israel's efforts this August, when the mandate will be up for renewal, would be against it. And then the big question is where the US will stand with the Trump administration's known approaches to the UN, to multilateralism as a whole, and to very, let's say, costly endeavors that the US is paying. When we look at the bottom line, Israel's war goal for Lebanon was to safely return the border communities to their homes. This is a mission partly accomplished. Something like around 60% have come back, but the rest have not come back after they were displaced. Israel still is holding 5 outposts in Lebanon to make sure that the border communities are not directly threatened. And down the road, you can say what awaits us next are possible border talks, which are part of the peace of the ceasefire agreement. Some discussions of prisoners of war, which Israel is holding, and a general discussion about potential peace and normalization. But I think that's far out down the road. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, Asaf. We appreciate that update. Now we'll turn to Ghaith El-Omari for the angle of what's going on inside Palestinian camps, the relationship with the Lebanese government to that challenge. Ghaith, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Rob. Look, I mean, the reason we're discussing the Palestinian camps in this today is because the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, was in Lebanon a couple of weeks ago. And in his different meetings with Lebanese leaders, the president, the prime minister, and others, he very explicitly repeated that the Palestinians are supporting the idea of disarming Palestinian camps in Lebanon. Now, this is not the first time that Abbas has said that. He said that in the past, including the last time he was in Lebanon 7 years ago. Yet, it's important and significant now because the context is different. The context, whether it's the Lebanese context, what we heard, the ceasefire, etc., or whether it's the Palestinian context, post-October 7th, with the competition between the different Palestinian factions in terms of dominance and representation. Yet, the statements, important as they are, remain symbolic. And I'll go into that in more detail in a minute, because the Palestinian Authority and Fatah and Abbas himself have limited power in many of the camps. And ultimately, how effective this is will be determined by how serious the Lebanese government is in the whole disarmament approach vis-a-vis Hezbollah or the Palestinians. And this goes back to what Haneen discussed. But maybe by way of background, we're talking here about 12 Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, spread throughout Lebanon. Different. Each one of them is different in terms of significance, size, who controls it, etc. The one thing they have in common is that by and large, they are outside the security control of the Lebanese state. This is a remnant of the checkered history of Lebanon, the civil wars, etc. Now, within these camps, traditionally, the most significant Palestinian faction was the Fatah faction. That's the faction of Mahmoud Abbas, the dominant faction in the PLO and the PA. Yet, with time, Fatah has lost much of its strength and is no longer the most important faction, partly because of some of the internal splintering in Fatah. A few years ago, for example, there were clashes and contests over control between Abbas's faction and another faction led by another leader by the name of Mohammed Dahlan. Some of the so-called Fatah affiliates have splintered and simply are now guns for hire, but there is a degree of splintering and internal dysfunction within Fatah itself. But more importantly, the decline of the Fatah control over these camps is a function and a reflection of the waning power of Fatah within the Palestinian national movement. And to mirror this shift of power, we have seen Hamas gaining more and more control over those refugees camps. The Hamas control really can be traced back to 2015, when a significant Hamas leader by the name of Saleh Aruri, who, by the way, incidentally was killed by the Israelis a few months after October 7th, I think in January 2024. But Aruri moved from Turkey, moved to Lebanon with a very specific intention of rebuilding Hamas's relations with Iran, using Hezbollah as a mediator. Hamas and Iran had lost relations after 2012, the civil war in Syria. Aruri set out to fix these relationships. And as he moved to Lebanon, he started developing the relation between Hamas and Hezbollah. And with the help of Hezbollah, basically managed to take over gradually most of the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. A more recent development, one that Haneen mentioned, is the alliances as well with the Lebanese branches of the Muslim Brotherhood, which also are in alliance with Hezbollah. Today, though, Hamas is the dominant faction in Lebanese and Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. So when we talk about actually disarming Palestinian refugee camps, we're really talking about disarming Hamas in Lebanon. Now, this is very important for a number of reasons. Some relate to Palestinian, some relate to Lebanese, some relate to regional. In the Lebanese context, disarming the camps is a dress rehearsal for the much more complicated task of disarming Hezbollah. And the seriousness with which the Lebanese state approaches this will be a good indicator, not only in operational terms, but also in political terms. How much will Hezbollah resist that politically, etc. So that's an interesting test case that can give us a sense of the seriousness and effectiveness of the Lebanese state. Removing the Palestinian arms and disarming Hamas will also deny Hezbollah a very convenient fig leaf that it had used in the past to create deniability in some of its skirmishes with Israel. There were a number of cases where, Palestinian factions fire rockets on Israel. Now, we all know nothing happens in Lebanon without Hezbollah on, but there was a degree of deniability. Removing Palestinian arms will remove that degree of deniability and put Hezbollah in the forefront. But disarming goes beyond Lebanese internal dynamics. It has something to do with also Palestinian dynamics. Ultimately, I believe that a war in Gaza will not end without Hamas relinquishing power in Gaza, which would leave Lebanon as potentially the only remaining arena in which Hamas can maintain an organizational and armed structure. If it's allowed to maintain that arena, to maintain that presence, then all attempts to dismantle Hamas in Gaza and elsewhere will be in vain, because Hamas can reconstitute in Lebanon, similar to what we saw with the PLO after Black September clashes with Jordan. And finally, there's a larger regional question here, which is that Hamas has been used in Lebanon, has been used by Iran to exert Iranian influence beyond Lebanon. Recently, there was a revelation in Jordan of dismantling a Muslim Brotherhood terror cell. What's most interesting, this terror cell was trained, equipped, and financed in Lebanon. And that was through relations with Hamas, which were basically a thin veil to relations between the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan and Hezbollah, and through that Iran. So dismantling Hamas will also deny Iran a tool to meddle in some of the other countries. Finally, what does this mean for the United States? Obviously, this is something that the US should be supporting on all different registers. However, I think the US should also look at this not only through Lebanese lenses, which is the way that it's looking at it right now, but should look at it at the wider lens of how do you deal with the Palestinian issue, counter Hamas, etc., beyond the very narrow angle of Gaza. And this, and I will conclude with this, goes back to the point that Rob raised in the outset. Do we have an American policy vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue? Do we have the American staffing vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue beyond the immediate, urgent, and very important issue of a Gaza ceasefire? But this is an opportunity, and it behooves us in this country to basically leverage it through having a policy that will try to shift the balance of power within the Palestinian arena. Thank you, and over to you, Rob.
Okay, very interesting. The Palestinian angle and the broader Hamas challenge that you discussed, Gaith. All right, we have a whole bunch of questions that have been raised by your remarks. Let's jump right in. So let me ask Haneen and Asaf, in some sense, to pick up on Gaith's concluding point about the American role. So Haneen, to what extent is the American role, has the American role, and is the American role important as a to prod the government of Lebanon to fulfill its ceasefire responsibilities? Does the Lebanese Armed Forces have the means to do everything it needs to do? Does it need more assets from the United States and other partners to do this, or is it really just an issue of political will? And from your perspective, Asaf, how would you evaluate the coordination with the United States in the implementation of the ceasefire and Israel's own role of taking things into its own hands when it sees that when it determines that things aren't being done adequately by the Lebanese Armed Forces? Is there full coordination with that mechanism that you referred to, that American-led mechanism? And do you see this as a, how substantial an improvement is this on the UNIFIL mechanism that was there previously? So Haneen, first you.
Yes, of course, the American role is vital in this sense, because now there's a void in Lebanon, a void left by Hezbollah, which is still there, but it's missing a lot of its components. A void left by the Saudis, and a void also left in general by the Western sphere. It's very important for the U.S. to fill that gap, and it doesn't need much. There are a few things that the U.S. can do today, and we're hoping that it will continue doing that. Despite the changes with the envoy, we know that the new ambassador is coming, so maybe the ambassador will be able to have a bigger role in this. But this is where the U.S. can do. The LAF is one angle where basically, yes, the LAF does have what they need for a little bit, for a while, in order to do the job. And yes, Israel has definitely changed Hezbollah from an army that the LAF could not confront to a militia that the Lebanese Armed Forces can confront. But they need is definitely at one point more equipment. However, they need motivation. Today, there's no real motivation, because despite the assistance and some of the salaries that are being spent on the Lebanons and some of the provisions, however, the Lebanese soldiers, the Lebanese army itself needs motivation in terms of the institution will actually take care of them. A lot of them work part-time after work as delivery boys. So we don't want to see that. We want to see an army completely committed to the institution and to the goals of this institution. This motivation could come from more U.S. assistance in terms of equipment training, but also more salaries to the soldiers. Another thing that the U.S. can do is work with its partner, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has left a huge huge gap in Lebanon. And today, if you think of Qatar's ally in Lebanon, that's what I said basically when I said Qatar is winning over Saudi Arabia and well in Lebanon, because the Muslim Brotherhood, which is basically a Hamas wing, if you think about the Sunni community, where the Muslim Brotherhood, backed by Hezbollah and Hamas infiltration, which is basically Qatar's allies in Lebanon, this municipal elections showed that they are very strong. And this is also another thing that the US can do, which basically bring in Saudi Arabia to have a little bit more influence. It doesn't take much. I'm not talking about coming back full blast like they did with Rafi al-Hariri, but something to counter that Qatari Muslim Brotherhood, Jama'at Islamiyya, Hamas influence. Third, is a more proactive approach when it comes to sanctions, because there are a lot of Lebanese who are afraid, like Lebanese who are working with Hezbollah, who are afraid of this administration and its maximum pressure approach, which is basically sanctions, which we saw in the first Trump administration, that is sanctioning Hezbollah's allies under Magnitsky or non-Magnitsky laws. This is what we need to see today in order to, like, at least, give an example of what can be done. Like threatening Lebanese politicians or like pushing or pressuring Lebanese politicians is one thing, but after a while you got to do something so they believe you. So this is where another proactive approach can come in and start looking at those who are still trying to give a lifeline to Hezbollah and start targeting them until they don't.
Okay, thank you. Asaf.
I think the most important thing in the Lebanese Armed Forces conduct and performance is the political will and the political, let's say, mandate given by the government. And in this situation, the role of the United States is to make sure that political will is there and that political space for operational activity is being created. So they need to be held up to their words, actually upholding the ceasefire, upholding their commitments. On the operational level, we have a US general in Lebanon now, part of the Central Command, Special Operation Forces, part. And he and his supporters actually move the whole system ahead. There are representatives of that command in Israel's Northern Command. The intelligence is flowing through this mechanism. In many ways, it took the place of UNIFIL liaison. And Israelis report much faster, much prompter dealing with the things. Israel is providing both a direct approach tool of taking out Hezbollah members. Something like 200 of them already died from the just from the beginning of the ceasefire on November 27th. And in this sense, it's a much better performance when you compare it to UNIFIL. UNIFIL is still unable to utter Hezbollah, and the UN reports say that some weapons were found believed to be maybe of Hezbollah. But just saying this is Hezbollah is still beyond the UN forces. The fact is that the Lebanese Armed Forces reports that it took out something like 500 sites in southern Lebanon. The UNIFIL said it found out about 200 and something, 225 or something like that. And in this sense, whatever Israel takes out beyond the scope of Hezbollah agreement, because we're talking about coordinated disarmament of the South, is actually the extra mile that reminds everybody that unless this is done in good ways or nicely, as the President of the United States says, it could be performed in unnice situations. But as resources and capabilities are involved, there is a real justification to take some or all of the $500 million per year annual budget for UNIFIL and diverting it directly to the Lebanese Armed Forces, who are the ultimate responsible agent for that commitment.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right. I want to ask about two sets of external factors that will have an impact on different aspects of the Lebanon equation. So first, Ghaith, a lot of focus on will there be a ceasefire? What is the fate of the conflict in Gaza? How will decisions in Gaza affect the situation in the camps and the competing sets of influence there for you? And for Haneen, how does the big shift in American policy on Syria, the embrace, as it were, of the new Syrian leadership, the prospective end of all sanctions on Syria, how will that reverberate inside Lebanon? So first, Ghaith.
Thank you. Look, I mean, putting aside, let's say, the human dimension of the need for a ceasefire and all of these kind of really important aspects, from a policy point of view, if you end up with a ceasefire in which Hamas can claim a kind of victory, and the bar is very low for Hamas here, simple survival, simple ability to remain as the real power in Gaza will constitute a victory. If you end up with this kind of ceasefire, then this will certainly embolden Hamas in the camps, will certainly send a message to Hamas in the camps in Aira, in Lebanon, outside Lebanon, that they have won, and it will make it easier for them politically and operationally to resist any attempts to disarm them. It will make it easier for them to politically confront the Lebanese state and say, look, we defeated the Israelis in Gaza, now you're going to go after us in Lebanon. A ceasefire, on the other hand, that ensures that Hamas is politically defeated, that Hamas does leave governance in Gaza, and at the same time ensures that Hamas does not have a foothold in Lebanon. We're having some clarity on this, will facilitate any attempts to disarm them in the camps. This will have obviously implications beyond Hamas itself, because that will also give ammunition for other voices, maybe not Palestinian, but other Arab voices that can say, look, the violent way of Hamas did not produce results. Let's look for a different way. So the terms of the ceasefire, and to the extent to which Hamas can say a ceasefire has validated or defeated their approach, will have implications for Lebanon, but also for the wider appeal of Hamas in the region.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Haneen, the impact of the shift of American policy on Syria.
No, this is extremely important because, and I'm glad you mentioned it, Rob, because it's really very important. Hezbollah was counting actually on the fact that Syria collapses again under Sharia, and that he fails at building a state or controlling the border. But what happened in Syria is basically giving Sharia a boost, economically, politically, you name it, because he now have the opportunity or the chance. Let's say we're not there yet, obviously, but at least he has the opportunity to take more control over Syrian territory through, like the army. If he actually goes into Abraham Accords and sign a deal with Israel that brings Syria into the under like the new Middle East, the new trend in the Middle East, leaving Lebanon completely behind. And this is really not reverberating well in Lebanon on the ground in terms of, like, look at Syria. Who would have believed that Syria would go into this direction while Lebanon is still stumbling? However, this means that Hezbollah is today more isolated than before. They have been isolated when Assad fell, but today it's the fact that the Syrian army today is capable of seizing shipments, arms shipments, missile shipments to Hezbollah says a lot. The news of today is very reassuring in that sense, and the more Syria is open to its region, the more Syria is open to the coordination with Israel over Hezbollah and whatnot. This means Hezbollah will be more isolated, which means that eventually, even if they continue keeping their arms, if the borders are demarcated, we know that the Saudis asked the Lebanese and the Syrians to start a process of demarcating their borders. If this actually happens, this is another push for more isolation of Hezbollah, but also what's happening in Syria is strengthening a government in Syria that is willing to work to contain Hezbollah in Lebanon. This means that even if they do not disarm, even if Hezbollah decides not to surrender its weapons, their weapons will be very internal and eventually, if all goes well, of course, useless, because it's on the long term, maybe on the short term, we will not see disarmament, but on the long term, if they are really isolated in that sense, it will be very difficult to get more strategic weapons if Syria is closed. So we'll see. It still needs to be seen. It's too early to tell, but it's an opportunity.
An opportunity. All right, very good. Asaf, in her remarks, Haneen spoke about the parliamentary elections next year as being the most significant elections in Lebanon's history, that it will determine whether the military defeat of Hezbollah gets reflected in a political change, a real political change in the Lebanese parliament. This discussion of Lebanese politics, does it resonate at all in Israeli strategy? Is there consideration of these issues in how Israel approaches Lebanon, or is Israel focused almost exclusively on the issue of targeting Hezbollah's arsenals and making sure that it finishes the job that the ceasefire, the transition of the ceasefire, but continuing with that effort?
Well, Israel is well known to be of a very tactical focus. And in the Lebanese context, it also carries the bitter legacy of 1982, which left zero appetite for Lebanese politics as part of our, let's say, strategic toolkit. I guess that some attention is given to trying to help in a subtle way Aoun and his government to promote what's being agreed, like they are perceived as positive forces in Israel's point of view. I think currently they successfully refrain from bear hugging the Lebanese positive parts. And as somebody said when asked if Israel can do anything useful, they said, "You've done enough." In this sense, and I think that the security focus will remain, but we have a few questions as to the stability and the prospects of the current situation. Will the Lebanese government go forward all the way on the long term? Just not just the elections, but doing the disarmament for real. Will Hezbollah continue to restrain itself from lashing back or attacking Israel under severe pressure that it's under? Will America be continuously involved in this security architecture, and what is the potential for a wider agreement, and I dare say a peace agreement down the road, which is not very close, but maybe further down the road.
Okay, thank you. I have a number of questions. Let me try to get all of them to you, or as many to you as possible in our time. Haneen, the arrival of the Iranian foreign minister, the suggestion that Iran is still trying to maintain influence in Lebanon. What is your assessment? Is Iranian money making its way? Is Iran able to resuscitate its partners in Lebanon? Or is Hezbollah really down and out? What is your assessment of Hezbollah's ability to revive itself after the military defeat it suffered in the conflict? Audio, please.
Yes, sorry. This is the most important question in this, disarmament issue, because if it's not forced to disarm, is it going to rebuild itself? This is very tricky, because so far Hezbollah's military infrastructure is still down. Iran is not capable of completely rebuilding Hezbollah the way they want to. It needs a lot more. They spent 40 years doing that, and now it's not going to be done overnight. Of course, they're going to try. Their financial situation is really not great, because yes, they are still getting some money, some from Africa, some from Iran, some from Iraq, but not enough to really handle everything, all the losses that they encountered, especially the challenge of reconstruction, which they are relying on Lebanon's government to get money for reconstruction. So this is very important for them. Is they are counting on two things. One is that through time, Iran will be able to send them some weapons, like today's shipment that was going through Syria and others. And they're counting also on Iran, the sanctions on Iran to be removed, so that Iran will be able to be swimming with cash again. And then they will find a way to send Hezbollah some cash so they can manage their community. Or they also need the money. Their arms is very important for the parliamentary elections, but also money is very important. And if they, until the next parliamentary elections, are still short on money in terms of reconstruction and salaries and compensations, then this little margin that helped them win might flip, and actually the others, because don't forget that this municipal elections, families ran after Hezbollah, but in the municipal elections, you'll have political figures running against Hezbollah. They did not run this time, and they're worried about that. They need the money. So far, they're counting on maintaining smuggling routes via Syria not really being able to hold its territory. This is becoming less and less likely, but also they're counting on Iran getting money through sanctions relief and so they can get more. And the international community to gradually forget about Lebanon. The fact that the US does not have a special envoy to Lebanon today is actually good news for them. Probably Lebanon will be included in some other files. I'm not saying the US is completely going to forget Lebanon, but they're counting. This is what they're hoping for. They're hoping that the fact that there's no special envoy for Lebanon today, then suddenly things will, for example, the strong control over the airport today is going to be kind of forgetting the US function, attention on Lebanon, or the bandwidth and the focus on Lebanon will decrease, and they're hoping for that. So it's not over yet. This is what they're hoping for, and this is what should be done. The opposite should be done in order to make sure that they don't get there.
Okay, thank you. Raif, Haneen's earlier remarks about the Qataris and their success with the Sunni vote prompted questions. Let me ask you about the role that the Qataris are playing, and any other external actor in the Hamas-Fatah competition within Lebanon.
I mean, this is not new. Qatar has been the supporter, along with Turkey, have been the political supporters of Hamas for many years right now. With Iran obviously being the supporter of the military wing, but when you talk about not only financial support for Hamas, but also political support, messaging support, this is coming primarily from Qatar and Turkey. You look at Al Jazeera, you look at statements, and we see it reflected also in some of the behavior of Qatar as a mediator in the ceasefire conversations. This is something that is of concern, not only in the Palestinian arena, but anyone who is worried that a success for Hamas will be a success for the Muslim Brotherhood brand regionally. I mean, it's not only the Palestinians who are watching; it's the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, in Egypt, and elsewhere. Unfortunately, I would say that after the president's trip to the Gulf, President Trump's trip to the Gulf, Qatar feels quite empowered. It feels quite strengthened. And it feels that there is absolutely no cost to be paid for supporting nefarious actors. So, in this regard, I think the Qatari influence, not necessarily in Lebanon, though, of course, there is a Lebanese dimension to it, but overall, if the message, if the orientation that Qatar is pushing is allowed to continue and to thrive, then I fear that the implications will go beyond simple support for Hamas, but also larger support for the resurgence of political Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood brand in particular.
Okay, very concerning, very worrying. Thank you very much. Asaf, I have a couple of brief questions for you. One, can you give an update on whether with the now that it's 6 months since the fighting has ended, whether there's movement of Israeli civilians back to their homes on their side of the border with Lebanon and what that process is looking like? And then more generally, in contrast with with Syria, which has a huge territorial issue with Israel called the Golan Heights. The territorial issues on the Israel-Lebanon front are relatively minor. Are they, in your view, reconcilable? Are they easily reconcilable? What would it take to solve whatever territorial issues exist between these two countries?
Well, on returning communities, border communities, the numbers are somewhere, as I mentioned, around 60% returnees, less on the real front communities and more in the further communities from the border. Metula, for instance, is still very low, and those communities suffered huge destruction by Hezbollah fires into their homes. So there's a lot of reconstruction to do before returning, but also regaining the confidence of the communities that it's secure to come back. When we're talking about territorial disputes, Israel and Lebanon in general have very little disputes except on security. You can go through the list of water, borders, land, and so on. There is the Palestinian refugee issue, a big stumbling block. But beside that, mostly Israel is concerned with the repeating emergence of security threats on its Lebanese borders. First, Fatah and Palestinians, then the Shiites, and now let's look what comes next. When you look at the size of territorial disputes, it's puny. Some of it is connected to Syria because the Lebanese insistence on the so-called Shab'a farms. Actually, we can ask the Syrians what they think of this Lebanese claim, which they believe is Syrian land, and Israel took it in '67 as part of the Golan Heights. So I think once the security and the refugees issues are addressed, I think the territorial parts are negligible and bridgeable.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Haneen, let me conclude with a question to you. We've spent the last hour essentially focused on different aspects of the Hezbollah disarmament question. You know, what role do other players play in this? American influence, et cetera. So the question to you is, in the Lebanese domestic context, where there's a broad array of issues having to do with political reform, economic reform, et cetera, where does this issue, Hezbollah disarmament, where does it rate on the list of national priorities? Does everybody agree that it's at the top of the agenda, or what is the domestic view of this very important issue that matters to everybody around the region?
Yeah, that's one of the problems. And I think there's a huge gap between the ground and the political scene. I think on politics, on the political scene, everybody's trying to focus on reforms, and not all reforms, like a certain kind of reforms, because it's easier and because it's less risky, it's less threatening, and you know, like you can easily like fight internal foes, but going after Iran and Lebanon is a big deal. So it's easier for the Lebanese political officials to actually focus on some reforms. Again, not all reforms, because, you know, like in terms of appointments, political appointments, we've seen a lot of horrible political appointments which actually defy reforms. So on the political level, yes, reforms comes first, although the talk is all about sovereignty and reforms, sovereignty and reforms. The formula at the top is sovereignty and reforms. However, in practice, it's reforms and then maybe sovereignty. On the ground, I think the majority of the Lebanese here, and I would say including the Shia is a different question. They need something else in order to move to the rest of Lebanon, and that's a different story. But the majority of the Lebanese want sovereignty first, because the war that happened in Lebanon was because the lack of sovereignty. The crises, everything that happened so far, yes, corruption is an issue, reform is an issue, but you cannot resolve reform without resolving sovereignty. No investment will come to Lebanon if there's a security problem. And there's a huge misunderstanding here with reforms. There's the IMF package that is tied to reforms, which is great. Everybody wants reforms, and the IMF package is great, but it's not enough. What we need is investment. This is what Syria is doing, and that's what we're lacking. If we really focus on how Lebanon, Morgan Ortega said that in her last talk in the Gulf, that basically what U.S. wants is Lebanon to become investable. So that it can attract investment, and this is really like what Lebanon used to be with the first, when the prime minister, former prime minister Rafiq Hariri, who turned Lebanon into a country that attracted investment. And this is what we need today: investment. But no investment is coming to Lebanon without security, which means without sovereignty. So the ground understands this better than the top, and this is the main problem in Lebanon.
Oh, very interesting. So sovereignty is the code word for disarming Hezbollah. Reform is the code word for focusing on other things than disarming Hezbollah.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you all very much. This has been a deep dive hour into different aspects of where Lebanon is 6 months after the ceasefire. I want to thank you, Haneen Khadar, Ghaith Al-Omari, and Asaf Orion, for your insights. Please go to the Washington Institute website for written analyses on all the issues that we've discussed today. And I want to thank all of our attendees and participants for joining us online for this special Washington Institute Policy Forum. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.